1, 2, 3.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin. And before we begin our conversation tonight, can I just explain again to people that Scéalta is a production of Fáilte Fierce to Hear and Fail on Football. Since we began, we've had the great, the mighty, the interesting, and the wee bit mad on the show. And in conversation tonight, my guest fits none of those. But what she is, and I'm all flustered. I don't know why she's as flustered as I am. She is a world champion, a multiple world champion, I should say, and she's going to tell us about that journey and how she got there. So it's GAA star, an all-round good person. It's Aisling Reilly. Aisling, thank you. Thank you for your time. And I know you're extremely busy, and I know you're doing a whole million of other things, and I want to talk to you, if I can, about wee bits of all of those, and not least of all the letter that you were part of contributing to and structuring that went at the weekend to Micheál Martin at Taoiseach. But before we get there, what's it like to be a world champion?
To me, it's just a very normal. It's just something that I had achieved, and from the day before to the day of to the day after, didn't feel any different to me personally. Obviously, my name and my stature was a bit more well known, but to me, I just the same. It feels obviously I'm privileged and I'm honoured that I was able to achieve that on behalf of myself and my club and my county. But just feel the same old Aisling, to be honest.
I asked someone, you probably know by my stature that I wouldn't be renowned for being an athlete. And anybody that's looking at this, on the other hand, will know that you're an athlete. That's just the difference. That's just the difference. But I was asking a fellow team member of St Pauls about you this morning, just to try and get a wee bit of a sense of where you're coming from. And he described you as the perfect athlete, just the perfect athlete. And I know that's a compliment, and I know you're a modest person by nature. So take us through, if you don't mind. And I want to discuss other than the GAA, but just to get this kind of identification. So take us through. You're a member of St Paul's. You've been there since you were a girl. You're from a family of 7, I believe.
That's right.
Okay, so take us through that part of it.
Well, first of all, obviously, when people describe you as being the perfect athlete, that's very humbling. But to take you back to the very start, obviously, things don't happen overnight. And it was a gradual process. So from mummy tells me from I was able to walk, I had a stick in my hand. I had a camogie stick in my hand. I could run before I could walk. And we used to escape quite a lot. I live in Charles Road, and we used to run away to St Paul's, which was our playground, if you like. So from 3 or 4, she would have got phone calls from the groundsman saying, "Maureen, Aisling's made her way up to the club again. She's in her baby groove. Could you come and pick her up?" So yeah, from I was no age, I would have had a stick in my hand or had a football at my feet, and that was really because coming from a family of 7 brothers and sisters who were heavily involved in the GAA. That's just how we played. Back then, obviously, we didn't have the screens, we didn't have the TV, so you occupied yourself. And we would have taken that from playing on the street, playing off any wall we could find, to going up to St Paul's, and that would have been right from as far as I can remember, from maybe I could walk. And then it just kind of progressed from there. I was involved in every team in St Paul's. Like, I played hurling with the boys, I played football with the boys, camogie with the girls, I played ladies football, I played handball. So at one point of my life, I played all 5 sports, and that would have been over club, school, and county. So if you think I'm busy now, I was much more busier when I was 10, 11, and 12. So yeah, like, I remember playing in the under 14 Scéalta with the boys when it was held in Belfast. We were very successful there. I remember travelling to camogie games and playing for club and county, and playing a camogie game and then having to get into the car and drive across country to play in a handball tournament. But those are all kind of things that make the person later on. Do you know what I mean? So those are the things that I kind of look back on now and remember fondly. And obviously all those small bits and those bits out training and playing obviously contributed to the perfect athlete, if you like.
You mentioned Maureen, your mother, and Robin, your father, and I know that you attribute your substantial success in no mean way to the support that they give you and continue to give you in terms of whatever you do, whatever you decide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Were you, and you mentioned your two brothers, right? And I'm only asking this because, as I say, this is sport is new territory to me. You know, I prefer a cream bun rather than a handball. But was there a competition in the house to see who was the fittest, could play the most sport, or could turn out the best, or was it just everybody's looking out for everybody else?
There was never that competitive aspect in our house. I have 4 brothers and 3 sisters. Yeah. And I would say the girls, if anything, were much more competitive than the boys. And that wouldn't have been in a family setting. That just would have been overall. So, like, my older sister, Grania, she would have played camogie. She played camogie for County, for Antrim. She would have been a kind of a very good camogue. And she also dabbled in a bit of handball. My brothers played hurling for St Pauls, but there was never that. My younger sister Brona, actually, she would have played ladies football and camogie, and again was class at both. But there was never that aspect of, you know, competing internally as a family. You know, like most people do, kind of. You know, we'll go out the back and we'll play for boys against girls. There was never that type of thing, but it was always, we were always so busy. So people were scattered all over. So it was going, whether it was one training session or another. But we always went and watched each other's games, and we always, you know, maybe pucking along the sideline or anything like that. But there was never that internal competitiveness. You were just kind of let free to do whatever you wanted to do.
You talked about playing one game in the morning, another game in the afternoon, and training that night for something else. And these journeys, how did you get from one spot to another? How did your parents drive you? Did you drive yourself from an early age? How did you make the rounds?
So from a very early age, obviously been playing in team sports. I'll give you a story. We played an Ulster ladies football final in Clonus. And I had a tournament in King's Court in Cavan beforehand. So I was driven from King's Court as soon as the tournament was finished. And it was actually a tournament to determine whether you go to an international competition in America. So every year there would have been a tournament called the Irish Junior Nationals. You made the team if you won the Nationals in Ireland. And then that got you on the plane to go at Christmas time to America. So I remember playing that tournament on the Saturday, winning the tournament, then being put straight into the car and driven from King's Court across to Clonus, where I would have met up with the team bus and then pulled the jersey on and went out and played for Clonus. Obviously, you know, at 15, I wouldn't have been able to drive myself, so I had a coach at the time, and it was just sitting outside with the car, ready to go, throw the bag in, and off you went to the next one. And that would have been very few and far between, but it happened more regular than you would have liked, where you were being pulled and jostled from one sport to the next. But thankfully and luckily, I was able to make it work. And there was people, even in ladies football, around the Ulster final and stuff, that the time was changed to accommodate me. So there was like major events like that would have happened, which obviously I'm grateful for, because it meant I was able to, you know, to get out for my club.
Is it true you never complain?
Never complained, probably outwardly, but I probably complained internally. Because, you know, like as most people, you never had but sport is my life anyway. So you wouldn't have had time for anything else. Not that you want, because all your friends were involved as well. And I did suffer player burnout at a very young age as well. So, you factor in all those different types of stuff and growing at the same time and having all these growing pains and then trying to play playing 4 times sometimes in one day. So all that did factor in. Complain? No, I wouldn't have complained because I wouldn't have done it if I didn't want to.
I was thinking more of, and this again is coming from someone, I want to talk about Fiona Shannon, who was someone that influenced you greatly as a young girl. But I was thinking more or less on the pitch. And someone described it, if you're going to kick anybody, this is from the opposition team, or you're going to smack anybody with the hurl, make sure it was you. First of all, you're shaking your head and you're nearly smiling. So I take it that's a fair assessment.
Absolutely, yeah. Most times when I went to line out, I would have, everybody else had one person marking them, I would have had 3. So it would have been that I would have had a stiff competition. But that comes with the territory, when most people say you're talented and you're gifted. I turned up every single day. I trained, I practiced, and those types of things. Pressure is a privilege, and that's how I took it.
I interviewed a man a few weeks back who, in his early youth, had turned out for Limerick. He ended up going to America. He ended up taking a university degree. He ended up a professor, and so on. He now heads one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in New York State. They employ 74,000 people. They have 23 hospitals under their control, and he came from abject poverty. And I said to him, what drives you? What gets you going? And he said, hurling. He said, hurling is the perfect training. He said, teamwork, durability, you have to know what you're doing, and more importantly, you had to know what everybody else was doing. So, and again, that spirit seems to have just engulfed what you've told us so far, that you were, I know you're very modest by nature, but that you always seen yourself as a team player.
Yeah, I never would have, said, I'm not training or playing because, I always showed up every single day. The only time I ever would have missed a training session for any of the teams would have been if I had been sick or really ill. But yeah, I showed up. I showed up just like everybody else. I did, but I had my bit. And I suppose I had the best of both worlds, being able to go from team environments to then an individual sport, where it was completely the opposite, where I had to focus entirely on myself. I was the only one that was, if I made a mistake, there was nobody else to around you to bounce off. Or so I think I had best of both worlds, and I also took that individual aspect into the team, where I was probably able to bring people along with me when if I was 5 or 6 points behind in the court. Being 5 or 6 points behind in a football field could be, or a camogie field is a long stretch, but there's always that will and that want and that drive to be able to push on, because there could be 10 minutes left or whatever, so it's never over until it's over.
I want to return to your sporting life, if you don't mind, but parallel to this, there's an educational aspect. So and I asked Jane Adams the same question, did you have to give one up for the other? And in her case, it was a very willing choice that she focused her life, or that part of her life at that time, solely on sport, because she knew that's what she was good at, and that's what kept her sane, I suppose. So was that something that was in front of you, or were you able to balance both?
It was never a challenge, because like Jane, I knew what path I was going down. So I knew I never had aspired to go to university after doing my A levels. So I went to Bunscuffle the first year, college the first year, GCSEs, A levels. But after my A levels, when everybody was deciding what university to go to, I knew that I needed to get a job to then get a car that would drive me up and down the country to train in tournaments and matches. and also that I would start being able to put money in the bank to get me to these international tournaments. Because even though I started in the civil service as soon as I left school at 18, bought my first car 2 months later, and was then able to start making that transition to being just a handball player to an athlete, and an international athlete and a world athlete. So I knew that's the path that I was going to do. And also in the back of my head that you can always return to education. Education for me wasn't the be all and end all. I had this other goal first that I needed to achieve, and that I knew that I could achieve, and I knew what steps that I had to take to get there. So it wasn't so much as a sacrifice, because now I'm back. I'm actually doing a degree part-time. So like, it's something that you're able to return into later on. So it's not the be all and end all.
Two words that you used there, which I'm going to come back towards the end, and I'm going to remind you that you said them. One was just a handball player, and I want to return to that. And the other is that choice of university or something else. I have grandchildren, and as you would imagine, they're all going through that stage of being at university or getting to university or preparing for it and all that. And we live in a world where young people are bombarded with failure or the potential of failure. I think sport is the exception of that, and I want to return to that as well. But clearly you're saying make informed choices. University may not be for everybody, and you have enough time in your life to go back. I think that's a very refreshing comment. Kids quite often, as you know, are written off because they haven't been to university. So can I just, for this part of our conversation, can you go back? I mentioned Fiona Shannon, someone who I'm told was a role model of the day for you. So just tell me about that, about her really, and about how it impacted on you.
Yeah. So when I would have been going to training sessions at the start, I would have been going to training sessions with people my own age. So there was me and 3 other boys, and we would have trained together. First of all, would have been under Mary Lindsay, who would have been a club kind of stalwart at that time, and then she transitioned. Once you get to a certain point with Mary, beyond juvenile, I think it's like 12, she understands that she can no longer do anything for you, and you need to move on to the next stage. So when my training sessions then changed from a Friday and a Saturday to like a Thursday, a Tuesday and a Thursday and a Saturday, which were the same times that Fiona would have been training. So when you're 14 and 15 and you're training at the same times that Fiona's training, and she's training for, All Ireland finals, the possibility of going to a US Nationals, a US Open, a world title, you kind of being around that environment and knowing what you're able to achieve in the sport at a senior and an open level, it opens your mind and your eyes a wee bit more, thinking, well, like, although I'm preparing for an under 16 a minor All Ireland final, I know that somebody in the club and from Belfast and from Antrim is competing at the very high level in the women's game, and it's doable. And that's just being around that kind of setup. It just kind of opened your eyes to the possibilities that it's doable and it's being done.
We all need role models. I have yet to find mine, but I'm sure there is somewhere out there who will inspire me. Can I ask you, just in terms of, you're a young woman, and so your experience is relatively fresh. Even at your day, if you know what I mean, even at that period when you're doing everything, you're playing football, you're camogue, you're handball, and all of that. What was the review perhaps within the GAA that women's involvement in sport was something less than serious, or was it taken to be on an equal footing with men's sporting involvement?
There's 2 sides of it. Like, playing with the boys, I knew that I could only go to 14, to under 14. And that's obviously because when you get to 14 and 15, then everything changes. People become stronger and taller and all that type of stuff. And that was a given. Certainly I've seen, when you look at camogie and hurling, when you look at ladies football and football, there's definitely a huge comparison between the males and the females, just based on, resources, the pitches, funding, travel expenses, all that type of stuff. But when you look at handball, and it's very much an even playing field. So you get the same as what I would get the same as what Paul Brady, who won 5 world titles in a row, I would get the same as what he did. I would get the same coverage. I would get the same media time. We would often go to events together. We would also play on the same All Ireland final days. So it would be the ladies would play first, and then the men would play after. So we always had that even playing field at handball. And that definitely isn't the case across the other sports in GAA. So I think in that sense, GAA handball is much further along in terms of equality for ladies, as opposed to the other GAA games. So there's 2 sides to that.
I want to focus for a wee while on handball, but just the last of your comments that handball is far more advanced or more advanced. Is camogues and everything else football, are they changing? Is it getting better?
Well, just today I read an article that the Dublin ladies were getting the same funding opportunities as the men. Now, that's a big story and that's great news, but it's 2021. Do you know what I mean? Like, some of them stories are 15, 20 years too late. Not too late, because obviously it's great that it's happening now, but this shouldn't be a major headline today. This should be, that this should just be a given. So in terms of, I think there has been great strides, but I think there's ceilings to be broke. There's far more work to do.
I'm going to ask you a very obvious question, and you've asked it 1,000 times, I'm sure. How do you become a world champion? Not once, but many times. How do you, both singles and doubles, I understand? Yeah,
so singles and doubles. I won my first ever world title in 2003. So I'm trying to think back of what age I might have been, maybe 14 at juvenile level. So I've been winning world titles since I was 13. So when you go to the open, which is the senior and the pinnacle. So
sorry for interrupting. Where are they held?
So they're held every 3 years, and they go between Ireland, the United States, and Canada. So every 3 years it rotates around those three countries. So 2003 it would have been Ireland. 2006 we went to Canada. 2009 we went to Portland, and then it goes back to Ireland and so on. But I suppose in terms of how did you become a world champion in an open grade, and in that transition between a juvenile or a minor player into the senior grades, there was kind of a turning point, and it was in 2009 I flew to Portland, and that was the first year I was 20. I think I was 20, and I played in my first open senior tournament, and I got to the final, and I was beaten by Fiona in that final. But up until that point, I was still playing camogie, I was still playing ladies football, and I was so close. So when I came home from Portland, again, we had an Ulster final with ladies football, an All-Ireland semi-final, which we were beaten in. And once I walked off the pitch after that All-Ireland semi-final in football, I knew that I would never kick a ball again, because I knew that I had to start working from that day for 3 years later. And also, it's some people, like the ladies footballers and hurlers, their pinnacle is playing in like Croke Park, but that's just not one of my goals. But like, to me, I've already played in my Croke Park, so those ambitions were never there for me, like playing in Clonus every year and all that type of stuff. To me, it was all about playing in King's Court or playing in sometimes playing in St Pauls. That was my pinnacle. So from 2009 to 2010, my name was put forward to join an elite athlete program, which is based in Jordanstown. It's called the Sports Institute of Northern Ireland. And there was me and 2 other handballers. And I suppose that then transitioned massively from, you got access to strength and conditioning. We had our own personal trainer. We had nutritionists. We had sports psychologists. We had physios. We had sports massage. That was all within our remit. So then from 2010 onwards, that then became probably then the journey of becoming the world champion over the next 6 years.
Okay, but for the uninformed or the ill-informed me, you think you nearly got up out of bed and put a tracksuit on. What is it? What would a day training be like for someone who's going handball? I mean, I played handball at the corner of the street when I was a child, and I think cried every day because my hands got stung. So what would it be like? What is the training regime to be a world class athlete handball player?
So the basic thing in handball and in any sport is repetition and practice. Like repeatedly doing the same things over and over and practicing again is what brings, like, some shots I could probably hit with my eyes closed because I just know where the ball is going to be and where I want it to be. But a typical day would start at 6 o'clock in the morning. When you wake up, you leave the house, you go to the gym, you do your strength session. Then I would have went to work in the civil service. I would have left at lunchtime, 12 o'clock, to go back to Jordanstown to have my physio appointment, to then go back to the civil service. And then from there, I either would have had a training game planned in, it could have been St Pauls, it could have been Gortnamona, or it could have been Cavan or Tyrone. So then I would have hit the road, did the training session, and been back home for about 9 or 10. And that would have just been a typical day.
Every day?
5 out of 7. Yeah. So you have to become engrossed and engulfed. It's like having a full-time job, but it's not a full-time job.
It's like having a full-time job, but worse. Or as we used to say in Carrickhill, but worser.
But worser.
Worser. So you mentioned the Portland experience. You're 17, I think. You go to Portland?
I think I was 19 at that stage.
Yeah. Were you lonely? Was it difficult? Were you? You know, I could have, before I done this interview with you, I'm nervous. I'm trying to get stuff into my head and remember dates and all that. But you're going to another part of the world, from West Belfast. You're flying to America. You're playing against people who you may have heard of, but you don't know. So how do you steel yourself? How do you get yourself into the mindset? Did you go on your own, or did family members go with you?
So again, the way it works in Ireland is you compete at the Irish Nationals. And if you win the Irish Nationals, you win a spot on Team Ireland. So that's all taken care of. So your flights are taken care of, your hotel is taken care of, and then you become part of Team Ireland. So you train, you go to training sessions here in Ireland, and then you form friendships and you form kind of like a camaraderie. And although some of us are competing in the same brackets, we're still this small group of Irish people going to a different country with all the same goal in mind, but we're all in the same position. But at that time in 2009, it was never I first started going to America when I was 13, every Christmas on an Irish team. So 6 years later, you know, when I was 19, to everybody else, I was the veteran because I had done it. I had been out. So I went to America every Christmas. I never had spent Christmas at home from I was 13 until I was 18. And then, and again, that was all the same. You're a part of Team Ireland. So you go out, you have your coaches, and because because handball is such a small community of people, you know everybody. So even though you're in a different country, you're phoning people and you're saying, right, are we going for breakfast? What are we doing today? Or we'll go and do this or that. So you kind of form this small family and group around you. So you never feel like you're alone.
We talked about, and we're going to talk a wee bit more about the successes, but there's also the matches you didn't win that you should have won. There's also, I suppose, like bad decisions taken against you or given off. Are you equally as good? Are you equally as good dealing with them as you are dealing with success?
Good question. I think as the years have gone by, I was able to cope a bit better. So when you go from winning everything in juvenile level to then going to senior, where you're getting beaten in the first 7 finals you've ever played in, it's disheartening.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would have taken 2 weeks just to be able to look at your gloves again. sometimes, you know, you thought, there's no point in me going back and doing that because I'm just going to get beat again. But then obviously when time passes and you cap yourself on and you have a word with yourself, and you just go back, it just becomes, once you get back into the court again, it just becomes that, right, here we go again, we'll start preparing for the next one. I probably remember some of the losses more than I remember some of the wins. And yet some of them are very hard to take, but as the years go on, you become a bit more mature about it. You're able to sit down and go, okay, what went wrong? What went wrong here? What can I work on? What do you think I could have improved on here? And then you just take that, and then you start applying it in the weeks after in the training sessions, and then you start maybe trying to put that into the next tournament. And again, it all comes down to, it's not the be all and end all. There's always another tournament.
I know you're fiercely loyal to the GAA, and if it's possible, you approach it like almost like a second family, with all the idiosyncrasies that a family has, and all the mad brothers or all the mad cousins and all that sort of stuff. Has the GAA, I'm not talking about the spirit of the GAA, but I'm talking about both the popularity and the professionalism. Has it changed out of all recognition in your own lifetime?
I think without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, in terms of how players approach games, what are expected now of players. You know, I talk about, you know, treating it was a full-time job, but handball also has that dimension of it's actually a professional game in America, although it's amateur here. So with football and hurling, they don't have, it's just completely amateur, but you're expected to live like a professional athlete. So even just the last couple of weeks, just transitioning out of COVID and the pandemic, and I train in a gym with quite a lot of other GAA athletes, and just of what's being expected of them in these past 3 to 4 weeks is crazy in terms of playing county. And some of them went from no training because of lockdown to being out doing 9 and 10 sessions a week, and being expected to cope and deal with that. So it has completely changed in terms of how the resources, even in terms of it's just a given that every team has a strength and conditioning coach and a nutritionist, and that's just a given now. Whereas 10-15 years ago, you probably had to Google your training sessions or YouTube them or find out what somebody else was doing, or do you know what I mean? So it's very more scientific. It's very more professional approach to it. And
are you broadly in support of that?
Well, again, for me, I had different experiences. So for handball, it's a given that if you want to get to the pinnacle of a sport, these are some. When you look at other sports like tennis and golf, it's just a given. So in support of it, yes, but I also think that there has to be some form of leeway for people, because you know, people have lives, people have kids, people have families, and you know, expecting people to be out training 9 times a week and is madness.
One of the things it strikes me, and the reason I asked you about the professionalism of the athletes in the GAA, who incidentally are very seldom ever described on the official media as athletes. They're occasionally described as players or as GAA people. You know, I by accident turn the television on the Saturday afternoon and I watch a local soccer or 2 local soccer teams playing. This is before the pandemic, you know, and you get a small crowd, very small crowd in a stadium. And it shouldn't be like that. All sports should be supported. Although I don't partake in any sport, I think sport's good for people mentally and physically. But you get this kind of small crowd, quarter filling the stand somewhere, and it's covered at prime time. It's covered on the day which is allocated to sports. And then you hear on the radio, you know, a GAA match where there were 13, 14, 15,000 people attending, and it's like nothing. Mm-hmm. It's like nothing. Mm-hmm. Is that frustrating? Does that anger people?
I think when it comes to like showing games and stuff, it's getting better because there's so much more outlets as opposed to primetime RT or primetime TG Cahir. Obviously, RT and TG Cahir are going to put on, the top teams. They're going to put on the Dublin footballers, the Mayo, all the Kilkenny hurlers, all that type of stuff. So it's now becoming more accessible to be able to watch. Like, for instance, I was able to sit and watch Antrim play Clare down the road from me.
Can I just stop you and say congratulations, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, fair play to you, lads. That was a big buzz for the whole county. So it's becoming much more easy, but sometimes having to go and actively find games to watch, like having to go, even though it was GAA Go, I think it was on, so you have to pay to watch Antrim, which is fine. But when you turn on those games and there's 5 people in the stands, and I think Antrim playing Clare was much more bigger game than some of the ones that were on, it can be frustrating. But look, it's just one of those things that hopefully when Antrim are competing for the Liam McCarthy Cup, we will not be having this problem.
It reminds me, I remember one afternoon turning on, it was the BBC, and it was one of those phone-in radio request shows and whatever. And a young lad from Tyrone phoned in and he was looking for a request for his mother. It was her birthday. This is a few years ago. And the commentator, trying to be nice to him, asked him his name and where he was from. He was from Tyrone, and asked him what he'd done as a hobby, and he said he played football. And the guy who was asking the question said, "Who do you play for?" And he said, "Tyrone." And he said, "There's no soccer team in Tyrone, is there?" And he just assumed that this was soccer we're talking about. Now, I think hard-won lobbying and the success of people like yourself have forced that change. But for me, it's a long way in the coming. So if I can move you off, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, go on ahead.
If I can move you off, I'm going to return to your sporting life, but if I can move you up slightly, and I know you were involved recently in an initiative that was encouraging individual GAA players and former players to send a letter to the Taoiseach Micheál Martin. So could you suggest, or could you explain some of that and what the suggestion is that the effect it'll have?
Yeah, so basically, it was really, I would be quite friendly with Jane, who you mentioned earlier, and Paddy, and I think it originated from a conversation that they were having. And then obviously Jane had reached out to me, and it was just about, was there anything that we as prominent, successful Antrim Gaels could do in terms of, around creating or sending a letter to the Irish government around creating the Citizens Assembly. And of course, like that, of course I was going to put my name to that, because I think there's nothing wrong with having a conversation. There's nothing wrong with having an open dialogue and just having discussions. And nobody's asking, for the sun and the moon and the stars here. It's just a basic create a citizens assembly and have people to come together and just have a broad conversation about Irish unity. If a referendum is called, what does Irish unity look like? Yeah. What does it look like for me, who's sitting here in Antrim? But what does it also look like for people in Dublin or Galway? And there's no issues with having that conversation. So the initiative behind the letter was just to put that to the Taoiseach and just to say there's nothing wrong with creating a group of people and having that open dialogue. And hopefully, off the back of the letter that we've created, we can get other counties then who will maybe take that step and push forward with that as well.
I spoke to someone before we confirmed that I was going to get an opportunity to speak to you, and they said that, and they'd also signed that letter. I have to say this: it's a very gentle letter. It's a very undemanding letter. It's more of a request than a demand, much more. And they said that they were amazed that the number of people had contacted them to say, this is a great idea, it's long overdue. If you're doing a letter again, we want to sign it.
Yeah.
So was that your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whenever we initially had the letter, and even just talking to people around the club, and specifically people around handball. First of all, when they seen the letter, like, you have to remember, we're just GA people. We're athletes, so we're not affiliate. That's all. We're just players of a sport, but we thought that we, as the GA, as a body of an entire country, we just thought that this conversation needs to be inclusive of the 32 counties. It's not just about counties here in the north. It's inclusive of everybody. But certainly everybody who I approached or I had spoken to or had spoken to me about the letter and the initiative were very positive about it. And again, like what you said, they were like, if this comes around again, I would definitely want to put my name to it.
Well, let me challenge you at a distance. You're not just anything. You're a world champion. And if I'd have been doing this interview with you, I'd have had my cup sitting beside me, and I'd have had my top and my medals on. So I'm going to ask you a question which you know the answer to again. What's the best club in West Belfast?
It's St Pauls, without a shadow of a doubt.
I know. I was just I was throwing that in. In terms of you're older now, but not much older. I'm saying very politely. Do you see your replacement on the horizon, or are they everywhere, or are they, they're taking a while to come through?
I think when you look at St Paul's and when you look at Antrim, I think the replacement at this point, at this immediate time, isn't going to be probably coming out of Antrim. I think we have a lot of work to do as a current player, and once I transition to a former player, we all have an onus on us that we need to give back into the sport. So, and I did, like, I would have coached in St Paul's a few years ago when I had a bit more time and it was a bit more freer with time. But I think the next person probably won't come out of Antrim, but certainly I will hope in years to come that I will have a hand in starting to flip that tide again, that Antrim will be more prominent in handball again, and especially in ladies handball.
It's fair to say that, and I keep saying in a short period, although you should point out that you're a veteran, you're involved in this all your life. You've never been in any other sport, but you have an interest in other sports. I understand that. But has there ever been a time when, and this is just my observation, but has there ever been a time when there have been so many people identified with the GAA? I mean, let me just give you an example of that. There's a column in the Irish Times, and it's a wildlife column, and it talks about seeing a particular sort of bird, Lady Dixon Park. Is this the first? And recently they had somebody who had a bit of wit, and a comedian wrote, driving down the Malone Road, seeing two boys with hurls. Is this a first? So is it my imagination, or is the GAA both in spirit, playing, and support? Is it just everywhere?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think, again, when you go back to like when I was much younger, every second person you would have seen on the Andy Town or Shaw's Road had a hurl in their hand. It's just that times have changed and technology has changed, that it's not just as in your face as what it used to be, but it's everywhere. And if you think it's not everywhere, you've got blinkers on. Yeah. And especially with the new club even being established in East Belfast, which now has like 4 or 5 adult teams, which is incredible for a club who only started a little over a year ago, or maybe slightly more than that. So it's 100% everywhere. Now, some bits of the country you might have to go looking a slight bit more, but if you go anywhere and you'll find a GAA pitch. It's there, it's right in front of you, and if you want to be a part of it, it's there. It's not that you have to go. You're not going to have to climb over mountains.
How do you? I'm told, I should have said this at the beginning. I'm told that outside of the GAA, outside of on the pitch rather, and at a handball court, you're very even tempered, but on the pitch you're a warrior, a warrior. So I think you can agree or disagree with that.
But I would agree.
Very good. So how do you deal with these media occasionally these allegations that the GAA is sectarian, or that it's there to annoy people, or it's there to be provocative? How do you just deal with it? You know,
People with comments like that are looking for something to be annoyed at. That, you know, but like certainly me or anybody who I know who's involved in the GAA, we don't go looking to annoy people. It's people who find fault, and that could be with anything. People find fault. If they want to find fault, they'll find fault, and that's fine if that's how you want to live your life, and if that's what you want to do with your spare time, you know, live at it. But we're just it's a large community. It's welcoming to everybody. Nobody will ever be turned away from the GAA, and certainly nobody that I have ever spoken to has ever felt deterred from the GAA. But if you're the type of person and you want to find fault with someone, it doesn't matter what it could be the GAA or it could be tiddlywinks. You will find fault, and that's just some people you just have to let be.
we've been talking for almost an hour. That might surprise you. When you're not training, when you're not doing 40 different other things, when you're not organizing letters, when you're not doing all that, how do you relax? Or do you relax? Maybe you don't.
Well, some of the people you spoke to, sometimes I'm too relaxed. But I, you know, just simple things like watching shows, or I love going finding a mountain to walk up. I have a dog, and it just sometimes getting up and getting away and going to the moors and stuff. So I'm not the type of person that'll sit in the house. So I'll go and find things to do. I like to be active. But yeah, probably 90% of the time I am relaxed, so I don't need to go looking for too much.
What do you call your dog?
Luna.
What kind of dog is it?
She's a Springer Spaniel, so she's a live wire.
Yeah, well, what else were you going to have? You holiday? I know you can't at the moment. None of us can at the moment, but under normal circumstances, do you have a favourite holiday spot?
Again, it's very rare that you'd find me in the country when we're able to fly. So I love going to Portugal, Spain, obviously with tournaments and stuff. I would be in America maybe 4 or 5 times a year competing, and then I'm able to do bits and pieces around that. So even though I'm out competing, I really find stuff to do, and I like to explore and to find things. So I love going to different countries, but Portugal probably outside of Donegal, which we also have a holiday home in, that would probably be my favourite place.
Our last 5 minutes, 3 minutes actually, I'm told, is me been distracted as someone telling me our time's almost up, and it's been a fascinating conversation. And I have to say, I kind of know more about. I'm not encouraged to do anything strange, but I know more about it. What does the future hold for you, for the GAA, for St Pauls?
Well, for me, obviously transitioning out of COVID, I would have been close to retirement, but obviously that's knocked me back. So, you know, I still feel that I have at least one more tournament in me to win at the ripe old age of 32. So that's going to be the next kind of project or challenge for me. In terms of St Paul's is flourishing. We had 70 kids at fundamentals, but there is a lot of work that needs done on handball. So maybe when I retire at 33 and a half or 34, that'll be something I'll step back into. And then as well with Antrim, you know, it's great to see the hurlers and the footballers and the ladies footballers and the camoes as well competing. Yeah, so I'll just keep trucking along and doing the best I can.
Well, I would be very confident that whether it's this last tournament or the nearly last tournament, training, inspiring, or whatever, we haven't heard the last of Aisling yet. So, Aisling Reilly, thank you for the great guest. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've loved it, by the way. I'm going to tell people all day that I was talking to a world champion. So, for being my guest, thank you. Amor.
Slán.